I think that Nick has like a different way of thinking in this type of society. Everybody's kind of like you're a character that you play, you're just like, oh, I'm smart, I'm not perfect, and like I know all these things about me, I've been everywhere, so I know everything. But Nick is kind of like, he doesn't say that stuff. He keeps it to himself because he's just kind of judging and analyzing everybody else's demeanors and auras that he can work out.
For all these characters are really not people to identify with. Nick helps us to be settled and help us come to some type of reasoning and judgment through his lens.
Nick is one of the few rational characters in the text, so you need someone like that to tell a story. You can't have someone like Daisy telling a story.
Yeah, like I agree with like everything everyone said. Like everyone kind of puts on a facade and Nick kind of sees through it. Like while everyone's speaking at the dinner table, he's kind of uninterested in what they're talking about because they're really just talking about other people or like their daily lives. Like he doesn't care.
I felt like he's the narrator because of like, you know, the way the author said it in the first page. He said, in consequence, I'm inclined to reserve all judgments, a habit that has opened up many curious natures to me and also made me the victim of not a few veteran bores. And then, you know, whenever you feel like criticizing anyone, just remember that you haven't had all the advantage, or they haven't had all the advantages. It's like, he's like a very unbiased and rational character, as like he said.
I'm really glad that you read that, and I think we always have to question just how truly unbiased Nick is, and if that's something that most people would say about themselves, that they could reserve judgments about people, or if that...
He only like describes the actions and never adds any comments to it.
But the only comments we get are the ones we see through him.
Yeah.
So the way we perceive Gatsby, the way we see everything that unfolds in the text is through his lens. So it is therefore colored. We don't know if it's the truth. We know it's his truth, but I don't know if he's as reliable as he's telling us he is. But it's really interesting that he thinks he is. And Fitzgerald certainly wants us to think that he thinks that he does. Does that make sense? Anid?
I was going to say he's neutral, really. So he follows, he's supposed to follow his father's words. I don't have to look on it. And so it says that, his father says that he shouldn't judge anyone based on because he doesn't know their experiences, basically. But when he sees Gatsby, before we get to know Gatsby's story, he already has an opinion of him, like he's such a great figure, he's a great guy. So he kind of violates that. So he's supposed to be neutral, so that's why.
Well, we also have to remember that this story is being told in flashback.
Yeah.
It has happened already. This is not unfolding before us. There's a certain level of nostalgia looking backward on the situation, which is another lens that sort of, I'm sure that if you had the best summer of your life, the way you remember it, the farther you get away from it, details aren't so clear. You guys are still relatively young, so you're pretty close to your memories, but talking from someone who's been a little further away from them, you forget a lot of details the farther you get from a situation that happens. You might remember the important things, and the way you decide to remember it has a lot to do with it as well. Like, I could think of a situation now that if you would ask 5 other people how it went down who were there with me, depending on their perception of the experience, it could be very different later, right? So, I mean, that's the other thing, too. We're getting it through his memory. Michael, did you have something you wanted to say?
Yeah, I kind of wanted to just get back to the question a little bit about why he chose Nick. It's just, it seems like, at least throughout the first half of the book, Nick's very good at analyzing a situation for the reader, almost. Kind of just lightening that burden. He explains the motives behind characters, analyzes what they do, and that just takes a load off the reader, I guess.
Okay. Anybody else have anything to add before they move on to their next question? Barbara?
I think the book would be a little less enjoyable if we didn't have Nick narrate readers, we always feel a need to take a side, and he adds a bit of comfort to the novel, even if he's not always the most biased.
Those of you who are writing the paper about the Great Gatsby might want to consider that as well. Whose version of Gatsby are we getting? And how does that person feel about him? And I think you're very right. We do look to grab onto something, and we want to trust Nick. I think we do. I think most of us would. I think it's easy to. But, you know, there's always things to consider, right?
The next question is, Fitzgerald only chose to have Daisy mention the baby once. What does this show about Daisy and Tom's true character? Lisa?
I feel like this shows how they don't really care about the baby at all. They focus more on like their material goods rather than their own living child. So that just shows that how materialistic they are. They would rather have things than other connections and relationships with other people.
I agree with Alyssa too, but I also feel like since they don't really care about the baby, maybe that foreshadows how they also like don't care about each other, because you know that Tom sees Myrtle and then eventually Daisy is gonna go back to Gatsby, so it might like play a part in showing them like how they don't really love who they say they love or like who they're supposed to love.
I was wondering
Bless you.
why he chose it to be a girl rather than a boy. Because like it seems like the way Daisy explained it, that she was excited to have a child up until she found out it was a girl, and then the disinterest came from there. But only because it was a girl, and like what statement that makes. And I haven't made conclusions about it, but you know that's what I was wondering.
I was gonna say I don't think there's much focus on the child because she's female. Because Daisy doesn't care.
Why do you think she doesn't care about a female?
Just the way she presented the function of a female in society. She just doesn't care for her child because she's a girl.
Oh, and then like with that, like what if it was a boy? I'm not sure what else anyone would want out of it if it was a boy, and how things would be different.
Yeah, they definitely treat the child just like an ornamental thing just to have, and once it grows up, it's too much of a responsibility to take care of. But there was this one line, I think Daisy said, she's lucky she's a girl, it's stupid. Yeah, she shouldn't be a fool or something. I don't know exactly what it is, but
I think that, well, this is what I think, that Daisy is not, like, she sees the way that she's treated by, like, men and, like, especially Tom. So she's like, all girls are pretty much fools. So I think when she found out she was having a girl, it might have, like, hit her hard, like, oh my god, my daughter could get treated like this one day. Like, I don't know if it'd be different if she had a boy. What do you guys think? Would Tom take more of an interest if it was a boy?
probably because he would easily follow his corrupt ways with his businesses, and I don't think he would want a female to take over that responsibility.
I kind of feel like she said that she wants her daughter to be a fool because immediately after she kind of goes on calling herself smart, and that like I would assume that she would think that all of her like troubles comes from her being smart and wanting things and not being able to have them. Like that the fact that she has failed through her life is because she's smart enough to understand her failure, and she just wants her daughter to be dumb and happy.
Kind of like what Peter said too. I was thinking the same thing. When you're so young, you're like naive and little, and she probably wanted to like preserve that so that her daughter wouldn't have to understand and experience it on a different level what Daisy went through, and like saw for herself.
Oh,
I think that, well, Daisy said that she was cynical about everything. So I think that no matter what gender she had, boy or girl, she was going to find some reason
not to pay attention to it or not to like it. If it was a girl, it was because she was going to grow up to be a fool, or at home, like what Gabby said. Or if it was a guy, she would be worried he would grow up to be like Tom, or somebody that left her, or something. She would find some way for it to be wrong. She didn't want to be happy. That's what I take from it.
And then we all kind of wore like the colors we thought represented the characters best.
I was supposed to be wearing white.
So like we thought like
Oh, and I had red lipstick too, but it was in here. Because Myrtle was supposed to be kind of like, I guess like vivacious and tempting, because she did pull Tom away from, his Daisy. But and then she's wearing whitish yellow to be good and happy and yeah, that's really it.
Before you could applaud, but there's something I want to address that hasn't come up. Setting is addressed in the first two chapters pretty explicitly. In chapter 1, we get East and West Egg and kind of the characters themselves, the characters associated with East and West Egg, and the places themselves certainly say something about who they are in their socioeconomic situation, the idea of old money versus new money, and the colorful, lavish life that happens there. I sent you a map this morning. So that you guys get a sense that you're kind of living smack in the middle of where this is all happening. Valley of the Ashes is very specifically Queens. And then the West Egg is Great Neck, and Manhasset is the East Egg. They call it the Gold Coast. And that's how it was in the 1920s. That's where it all came from. And I'm sure you guys know, if you went up to Sands Point and you were in that area, the houses are fairly spectacular over there on the water. And then you have the description of the Valley of the Ashes, where the color shifts and becomes quite drab. And you have Myrtle and Wilson and the billboard, which you guys had the billboard up there, associated with the Valley of Ashes, which is this sort of middle dead area between the city and the two eggs. And the city is the third entity, the third setting that sort of kind of comes into play, where we have this situation where illicit things happen and people go to do some shady dealings, so it seems, whether it's have affairs and get drunk during Prohibition, or it's have those lunches with people where they're making their dirty deals in different places. So what I want to open up to you all now is about these settings, because I think it's really important in terms of what Fitzgerald was trying to do. I told you at the very beginning of our discussion of The Great Gatsby, is he's sort of like having this social commentary, a cultural social commentary on the time he's living in. And this novel, I think, Barbara, you put it well, like the narrator kind of looking in on this world that's happening, as Fitzgerald himself actually did. He kind of was there, but on the outskirts, while all of these things were happening around him during the 1920s. So settings, how and why do you think people are associated with specific spots, and what role do you think it plays in the text? I know it's really warm in here. I apologize for that. It's really not my fault. So, just setting, how the characters associated with different pieces and elements of the story, and why does Fitzgerald set it up? I mean, we start the story with a little background, and then we get a lot of information about where we are. And 3 distinctly different settings, kind of back to back to back, right? I mean, the whole rest of the novel, it doesn't really come up much, except for maybe the description of Gatsby's house, which is, again, another stark contrast to the Buchanan's house on East Egg, because there's certainly a contrast between old money and new money, which I think Fitzgerald is also making a commentary about. So what do you think? I'm gonna stop talking now, and someone who maybe hasn't participated yet, setting. Dimitri?
I want to talk about how Myrtle's
Vincent,
family.
you want to just crack the door, please?
Myrtle's-
Jason?
Myrtle and Myrtle's family all made a lot of comments about her husband and how like he had to borrow a suit to get married, how he didn't have a lot of money, and how like living in that old garage is like horrible for Myrtle. Like if you didn't have money, it was very like frowned upon. And, like how could you possibly have a wife if you don't have money? And then they all say that Tom was the first gentleman that Myrtle's ever like had. So I think it's like a big divide between people with money and people without, and how Myrtle is able to be with Tom, but a poor man like Wilson wouldn't be able to be with a rich woman. I think it shows like that also shows a lot about how the man has to kind of like have class to like have his family all in order and everything.
Financial security.
Yeah, financial security to like get a woman, but like a woman can kind of marry into it, like how they were saying about Myrtle.
Okay. All right, so rather than kind of force you out of it, let's get everybody involved now. If you could either start tweeting questions or ideas to the hashtag right now to sort of fill out, and then we can reset the room back to where it needs to go right now, and everybody can